Castrol's technology team follow industry trends, evaluating and testing engines and vehicles relevant to the car park of today and tomorrow. With the rise of plug-in hybrids and range-extended electric vehicles in some markets, and the benefits that they can bring to drivers, it's particularly interesting to note the increased rate of hybrid vehicle sales versus battery electric vehicles. Now, with technology hubs strategically located around the world, Castrol are able to keep up to date with the integration of the latest hybrid technology and the requirements of drivers and manufacturers globally. So James, what is Castrol's understanding of hybrid technology?
So we've been working for a long time to understand the operating characteristics of hybrids. It all started with the launch of the Toyota Prius, which came into the market as the first commercially available hybrid in 1997. In the year 2000, we imported one of these from Japan and we started a field test. And the objective of that field test was to look at the impact of the intermittent use of the engine in the hybrid system and the knock-on effect on lower oil temperatures, anti-wear systems, wear, and the behaviour of the engine oil. We've been continuing to conduct research and release publications about the impact of hybrid for the last 25 years. Ever since the sales of hybrids really started to accelerate, we've placed even greater focus on this testing to understand the impacts that this can have on our engine oils. In 2021, we started a field trial looking at 10 cars, each with different levels of hybridization. We had 3 mild hybrids, we had 3 full hybrids, and we had 3 plug-in hybrids, with an ICE vehicle used as a control. The route was around Darmstadt and was a 45-kilometre long route, which took roughly an hour to complete. The cars would complete this loop twice and then return to base for a cool down and then allowed to charge. And this shift pattern was repeated until each car completed 30,000 kilometres of running. Every 3,000 kilometres, we took oil samples so that we could monitor the condition of the oil throughout the field trial. A critical observation from the field trial was the emerging link between the average oil sump temperature and the relative proportion of e-motor driving for each of the individual journeys completed by the different hybrid vehicle types. The vehicles with a larger battery were able to complete a greater proportion of the driving on electric motor alone, and that had a greater impact on the average oil sump temperature. So this graph illustrates the impact of the levels of hybridization on the average oil sump temperatures, and also it started to accentuate the differences in the operation between the different hybrid types. From the field trial, we also started to see a distinction between the mild, full and plug-in hybrids on the engine operating characteristics and also the impact on the engine oil. And this informed our decisions when it came to future testing and field trial design. To understand the impact of these cooler oil temperatures, we did oil analysis at regular intervals throughout the field trial. And when normalised for the amount of time that the internal combustion engine was operating, you start to see distinction between the plug-in hybrids, the full hybrids and the mild hybrids. It showed that the lower oil temperatures in plug-ins and full hybrids were contributing to an increase in water and fuel contamination build-up in the oil. It's an expected characteristic of an internal combustion engine, or ICE, for water and fuel to enter the crankcase during combustion and interact with the engine oil. But clearly in the ICE and in the mild hybrid, the oil temperature is getting hot enough for those to be removed. The lower average oil temperatures that are seen in the plug-in hybrid and the full hybrid are contributing to the fact that the water and the fuel is not as easily removed from the oil. Whilst we ran the field trial independently of any vehicle manufacturers, we continued to maintain our partnerships with our OEMs all across the world. Those OEMs started to come to us with data that they'd seen from the field. And this data was suggesting that you could get extremely high water and fuel contamination, even up to 10% with some hybrids in some conditions. It made us question why during our field trial, the cars were not accumulating the same level of contaminants as was reported from testing in the field. In 2023, following years of development, Castrol published a paper which looked at the live introduction of water contamination into an engine oil. The test was developed on an engine and a drive cycle that was relevant both to internal combustion only and to plug-in hybrid vehicle types. So in this graphic, you can see that the piston rings can't prevent small amounts of the combustion gases escaping past them and allowing to then interact with the oil in the crankcase. Now this is called blow-by, and blow-by gases contain water vapor and a small amount of unburnt fuel. As the blow-by gases enter the crankcase, they can start to interact with the oil. Now, usually, those blow-by gases are removed by the ventilation system, but that process cannot prevent that water and that fuel vapor from mixing in with the oil. So the ability for that water and the unburnt fuel to then be removed from the oil is dependent on the oil temperature. And the oil temperature is linked to the type of hybrid and then also how that hybrid is operated out on the road. So we installed a sensor in the crankcase, and that was exposed to the air within the crankcase, and that could demonstrate that there was water present in the blow-by gases. With similar sensors placed in the oil sump and also in the oil galleries, we were able to demonstrate live that the water content increased and decreased while we ran the engine through a standard industry drive cycle, the WLTC.
So by carefully monitoring the live water content in the oil itself, you were able to establish the mechanism by which the water remained in the oil whilst operating as a plug-in hybrid.
That's right. So this graph shows a direct comparison of the measured water content for ICE and plug-in hybrid vehicle operation over the same drive cycle. Now, if we look at the characteristics of the ICE vehicle, you can see the oil temperature rising rapidly. So does the water content, but it quickly returns to stable levels because the oil temperature gets beyond the critical temperature of 40 degrees. Now, if we look at the plug-in hybrid, it takes a lot longer for the oil temperature to increase, and it takes a lot longer for the oil temperature to reach that critical 40-degree mark. And as a result, you see a much higher level of water content accumulated, almost as high as 600 ppm.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like, as you say, on the water content, you can see here in the ICE engine only growing to, as you say, 300 ppm, but in the plug-in hybrid, it grows to double the size. It's super clear to see.
And this is the mechanism by which our OEM partners were talking about when they were seeing much higher levels of water and fuel contamination within their engine oils in the field. In 2024, we developed a new engine test to take a further, more in-depth look at the mechanism by which water and fuel contamination can enter the engine oil. We tried to replicate some of the more severe conditions that we had reported to us from the field. The test was able to build the levels of contaminants to between 15 and 20% fuel and as high as 2% water. This was done by running consecutive repeats of a very short commute-style journey of 7.8 kilometres over a span of 2,500 kilometres, or around about a quarter of the life of a typical in-engine service. So the test builds contaminants by running multiple short cycles with low oil temperature, and the severity of the test is proportional to the number of those cycles that are run consecutively. This sort of trip could be a typical commute or even a journey on the school run. This drive cycle is really effective at building high levels of contaminants of both water and fuel, and starts to replicate the sorts of conditions that we're seeing out in the field reported by our OEM partners. It's worth noting that the conditions are relevant to European driving, and perhaps it could be even more severe in colder climates, like for example in China. Used oil samples were taken from this test to analyse the impact on the engine oil formulation. These samples were taken at different points throughout the engine test. The sample on the left, the darker sample, was taken after the equivalent of 1 week's worth of running and contains low amounts of contamination. The sample on the right was taken after 8 weeks equivalent of running, and the dramatic colour change is associated with the high levels of water contamination. The third sample is a mixture of fuel, water, and engine oil components that have been removed by the crankcase ventilation system. And this is a demonstration of the amount of those contaminants that are entering the system while the engine is running.
So you can't very easily see inside the engine to see the condition of the oil, but there are some telltale signs, right?
That's right. So if you remove your oil filler cap and see this sort of white emulsion on top of it, that might suggest that you've got a similar emulsion present in the engine sump.
Yeah, this is a really stark image for me. That emulsion is super clear on the top of that filler cap, and that's not something you would normally expect to see. So James, fundamentally, engine oils have been designed alongside the development of internal combustion engines in ICE-only vehicles. Now, in these vehicles, engines are designed to warm up quickly as possible to allow them to operate at that peak efficiency that you spoke about. Now, the introduction of hybrid powertrains has introduced a step change in the conditions that engine oils are having to operate in.
Absolutely, and not all oils were created equally when it comes to handling that step change in hybrid conditions.
Yes, and water that is not held within the engine oil is able to interact with the metal surfaces within the engine, and that can cause corrosion. And in very cold climates, there's a risk that settled water can actually form ice. And this can block the oil pickup in the engine from the sump, preventing the circulation of oil to lubricate the engine at the very next startup.
That's right. Also, additives within the oil can be disrupted by the presence of water. Anti-wear is in an oil formulation designed to prevent the contact between metal surfaces. In addition, detergents are in oil formulations designed to clean deposits and neutralize acids, and having water can disrupt the ability of detergents to do their function effectively as well.
So the development of these products in these hybrid engines is a constantly evolving process, and the data and the insights that we gather go into generating the insights for future generation of products.
That's right. In the lab, we can look at formulations even down to the component level, and we can understand how different chemistries within the oil formulations interact differently with the water contamination. So we pose the question, if we see these sorts of extreme hybrid conditions within an engine, can we replicate that in cars on the road? So that's when we commissioned our second phase of the field trial, with 5 vehicles, 1 mild hybrid, 1 full hybrid, 2 plug-in hybrids, and an ICE, both as a control and a crossover from the first field trial.
So the first field trial kind of looks at the conditions within the engine within a hybrid engine that a lubricant sees, and then the second field trials looks at the different drive cycles and those tougher conditions that the lubricant sees in those different cycles.
Absolutely. As we did in the engine test, we replicated the severity by running consecutive short journeys with low oil temperatures. And we ran infrequent longer journeys to test the ability of the vehicles to remove contaminants. The trial has been scheduled to run over the European winter and is ongoing. And we're already starting to see some really good insights on the driver's usage of the hybrids, and also some insights on the build-up of the contaminants of water and fuel in the engine oil. It hasn't taken long for the different hybrid types to show different behaviours. The full hybrid, for example, over the first 50 runs, has an average oil temperature of 47 degrees Celsius. Compare that to the mild hybrid and the ICE, which have average oil temperatures of 90 and 97 degrees respectively. And this should start to build a high level of contaminants within the full hybrid, as we hoped in the design of the trial. So we carefully selected the starting state of charge for the plug-in hybrid, because from the scoping phase, we noticed that with the short journeys, the plug-in hybrid was completing them without using the internal combustion engine at all. So we set the state of charge to the point where the vehicle would start the journey on the electric motor, and then at some point during the journey, it would switch from the electric motor to using the internal combustion engine. And you can see from this graph that at the point where the battery level is insufficient to run on electric motor only, the internal combustion engine comes on and the engine oil temperature starts to increase. Then, as the car uses regenerative braking, it charges the battery and you start to see a return to the electric motor only mode. And that is why the engine oil temperature doesn't increase as you might expect it to do for an internal combustion engine only. In itself, what we've had to do with the plug-in hybrid and the selection of the state of charge distinguishes it from the other hybrid types. But you can also see from this video here that you are seeing that build-up of contaminants, and the telltale signs is that emulsion being formed and shown on the filler cap. Data from the plug-in hybrids is already revealing the wide range of operating conditions in which the engine can be used. And there are lots of things that depend on this. First of all, you've got the battery state of charge. You've also got the driver's style, and then the vehicle mode that the driver selects, whether that's electric mode, charge sustaining mode, or even sport mode. And this can have a knock-on effect on the way that the engine is used throughout the drive.
Okay, so with such a wide range of operating characteristics, you decided to take a look at the impact of the lubricant formulation on fuel economy also.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things we wanted to understand was, is the typical relationship between an engine oil's viscosity and its ability to perform in fuel economy still true for the different types of hybrids that exist? So we started to develop some fuel economy tests to look at this. Testing fuel economy is not an easy development path to take. It requires tight control of the engine operating conditions, and accurate measurement in order to produce good results. Adding hybridization into this increases the complexity again and makes it really hard to get effective results. You also need to be able to formulate your oils to see the differences between the different characteristics of the engine.
Yeah, so you're basically looking for the parameters to be all controlled, so you're really focusing in on what is the impact of the lubricant formulation itself on fuel economy and not influenced by some other parameter or factor.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So you also completed a fuel economy study looking at 2 different types of hybrid engines and a traditional ICE engines in 2024. What insights did you gather from this?
In a set of ICE, plug-in hybrid and full hybrid chassis dyno tests, we demonstrated that different engine architecture in different OEM vehicles could lead to a different response between viscosity and the effect of fuel economy, based on the different splits between the usage of internal combustion only and electric motor driving. So this graph looks at the comparison on the same drive cycle of the different engine load and speed ranges that were used, and the size of the bubbles is proportional to the amount of time that was spent in each region. Now, if we start by looking at the internal combustion engine only vehicle, you can see that the points are collected at the mid-speed and low load range. Now, if we overlay the full hybrid, you'll start to see that the points here were collected more towards the high load and high speed range. And this is actually something you might come to expect to see with range extended electric vehicles, because their operation is selected to suit the charging of the battery. Now, if we put plug-in hybrids on top of this, you'll see something completely different. The plug-in hybrids show operation across a broader range, and that indicates a parallel use of the electric motor and the internal combustion engine.
Yeah, I find this chart absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's so clear that you can see the different operating conditions of the engine in these different types of vehicles. It's very clear that the lubricant then has a different job to do.
So even with a very small sample size, we can see the impact that the different levels of hybridization has on the operating characteristics of the engine. And looking at this graph, you can see the impact that has on the warm-up of the engine over the same drive cycle.
Yeah, this is another fascinating chart because you talked earlier about 40 Celsius being that critical temperature for the engine oil, and you can see how much longer it takes for the plug-in hybrid to reach that 40 degrees Celsius. I'm also interested to understand, what does this mean for fuel economy?
We compared the use of 2 formulations, 10W16 and 10W20, and we did that on the 3 different vehicle types, the ICE, the full hybrid and the plug-in hybrid, to look at the impact that the different viscosity grades had on the resulting fuel economy.
Okay, that's really interesting, because what you'd normally expect is with a thinner lubricant, the vehicle needs less energy to kind of move that around, so fuel efficiency would improve, which is what you saw with the ICE, but the exact opposite with the plug-in vehicle.
We're releasing a publication in the not too distant future, which will go into the isolation of the effect of that.
So James, what's next for Castrol's hybrid research and development?
So we'll continue to monitor and understand new hybrid technologies as they come into the market, and we'll also bring our expertise to the industry alongside the development of products, and this will help manage the automotive sector's journey through the energy transition.
Thanks, James. This has been absolutely fascinating. Now, our journey with hybrids has revealed many insights and developed our understanding of the technology to the point where Castrol is one of the leaders in the industry.